You know, it was exactly 24 hours ago we were sitting here announcing that the first hostages were actually being handed back to Israel. But they, of course, were the living ones. Only 4 of the 28 dead hostages have so far been returned, and already there's talk of Hamas being in breach of the peace deal. What do you think, guys? Is this a wobble in the process, or is it the start of it beginning to fall apart?
It's precarious. It'll be precarious all the way. And look, Hamas are capable of playing games. The Israelis are capable of looking for a reason to renew hostilities. And the truth is, it may be very difficult to identify where some of the remains actually are now.
I think you're right to point out that as soon as the deal was signed, it was very likely that there were going to be difficulties, and the detail was always going to probably, I think, trip people up. But the important thing is that we bag the win and we just stick to the plan. But I think there'll be lots of people on both sides will want to upset the agreement. And we've been here before in the Middle East. You know, we've looked at deals. I'm old enough to remember when Rabin was shot, and he was a great peacemaker. And then a crazy guy shot him and set things back.
An Israeli.
It was an Israeli. You're right. But these extremists can be on either side, and they can do violent things which can upset the process, and that's where the stage we're at.
The thing is, Kevin, of course, that it was the first part of the 20-part peace plan was the return of the hostages with a firm deadline of 10 o'clock our time, midday Israeli time, yesterday. And it was the 20 living hostages, and we've seen jubilant scenes where they have been reunited, and thank God for that. And it included the 28 bodies. Now, the 28 dead hostages were not lower down the list, the order of requirement. They were right there as a requirement at the beginning of the peace deal. So if Hamas says, can only find 4 of them, that's a massive problem.
Yeah, you can't end the suffering of the dead, because they're no longer with us, but you can the suffering of their families who want the remains of their loved ones and to give them a decent burial and get some form of closure.
I mean, Kevin's right.
But we've seen, if 83% of buildings in Gaza are destroyed or severely damaged, it looks like a building site with everything.
Is that what Hamas is trying to draw attention to?
So, look,
we can't find them. Look what you've done to Gaza.
This is what I thought. If they can't find all the bodies, it may well be the case they don't know what's happened to those bodies. And you've got to remember, Hamas has been very sneaky in this. They've used people as human hostages. They would have put some of those hostages perhaps in harm's way. And so if a building gets destroyed, it's very difficult probably to recover those bodies. I mean, I don't want to get into that kind of morbid detail, but that's, I think...
Well,
but if this is the sticking
matter,
point, and if no more dead bodies are returned and it stays at 4 out of the 28, is that enough to derail such an important piece?
I don't think it will be. I think there's enough momentum behind this.
It depends your point of view, though. If you're one of the real extremists in the Israeli government, which is a coalition, then yes, it is.
Or if you're a spokesman for the Hostage Forum, which represents families of those held by Hamas, who have already called for the immediate suspension of all agreement implementation until every deceased individual is returned.
So would that mean bombing Gaza again?
Starving people?
Sending the troops back in?
Well, Kevin points out it's a coalition. So there'll be people on one of the extreme edges of the governing coalition in Israel who will be looking to unstitch the deal. They'll be looking at ways in which, frankly, they can stop this process.
Israel Katz, the defence minister, says Hamas has failed to meet commitments. Any delay or deliberate avoidance will be considered a blatant violation of the agreement and will be responded to accordingly.
Well, presumably, Hamas would say this isn't deliberate, as you say, we can't find them because you bombed us to pieces and it's impossible to locate these bodies.
I think it would be naive to think they can't play their own games and they can't think, right, we're going to apply whatever pressure we can at times and not be as cooperative as we could. Look, we're not dealing on both sides here with Boy Scouts and Girl Guides.
Israel delayed releasing the Palestinian detainees and prisoners yesterday by some hours.
But I think the best way of finding those bodies is keeping the agreement going. Is keeping the pressure on, yes, but it is not resuming a war, which has cost so many lives.
Well, should we just pause to celebrate some of the joyous moments yesterday? This is my favourite series of images from yesterday. This is Omri Moran, 48-year-old, who's abducted in front of his wife and 2 children during the attack. And this is him being reunited with his little children who he'd not seen, and they hadn't seen him for 2 years.
Yeah, because they were 1 and 3 when he was taken hostage.
Yeah.
So, you know, 2 years on, they barely have a memory. And
what I love about this is how quickly they drop into play. I don't know if we have these images here, but they start throwing things at their dad. They start throwing cubes of kind of plastic at him, and like that. You see, I mean, within minutes, it's kind of back to normal.
Is it? Well, is it back to normal?
In those
the amount of trauma counselling you're going to need, the amount of reconnection therapy you're going to need.
I think for the adults. I mean, the children just seeing them play, I think, with their
That's what I mean,
their dad is very sweet.
His resilience is remarkable there, but you're quite right. For 2 years of living in absolute terror, not knowing if you're going to see another day. Awful conditions. That is going to leave its mark. Hopefully, he'll get the help. I am just mindful of talking to British ex-service people who fought in Afghanistan and Iraq. You get lots of help initially, and then it falls away, and people don't want to know anymore. Hopefully, Israel isn't going to do that with the hostages and will give them care. But you also looked at the joy on the Palestinian side as their prisoners, detainees, hostages, because 1,700 had been lifted and held without charge, so they consider them hostages. You see that joy at families being reunited. But you just hope that is going to overpower those who want to resume the fighting.
But look, I think in terms of the broader context, the fact that President Trump could bring Netanyahu to the table, I think, was a significant outcome.
Yeah.
And drove.
Well, he dragged him to the table.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah.
He did. And it's unclear to me that. I mean, I don't want to, overplay Trump's hand. I mean, he's done plenty of that himself. But I think, he has played.
Well, there was a wonderful moment yesterday when all the world leaders, were gathered together on stage, and Trump was beginning to make his speech to the media, basically, and our Prime Minister was standing behind him. And I think Sakir misunderstood what Trump was saying and thought he was inviting him to come and speak. So this is what happened. Next in.
He was all ready to do an address, do you think?
I'm sure in the public good. But it does show that the most incredible bromance in modern politics is between Trump and Keir Starmer. Some people think it works for Britain. Others, me included, fear that we just get sucked in and you become a bit.
But it wasn't a bromance. I mean, with Trump, he's always got to be the top dog. He's always got to be at the centre.
And you either buy into that or you don't.
And you either buy into it or you don't. And the fact that, Keir thought for a second that he was going to take the podium, I thought showed...
It's not a serious moment, but it's quite amusing.
Yeah. Delusional.
Did it bring back memories, Kevin, of when Tony Blair was sort of sucked into the slipstream of George Bush over the Iraq War?
Yeah.
And, accused of being his lapdog, his poodle, that we didn't take a strong enough stance against the Americans when it came to the Iraq War. And now he might be the person who is part of the governance of Gaza. A lot of people will be thinking, hang on a moment, Tony Blair and the war in Iraq is one of the reasons that we have so much conflict.
And it was disastrous. And I still believe Britain was taking to war on a lie, and the lie of weapons of mass destruction, which didn't exist.
But it was an expensive lie. I mean, 1 million Iraqis were killed, weren't they?
Yeah.
And British service personnel killed. It was utterly disastrous. And I think the prime motivation at the time for Blair felt to be that he wanted to be close to a US president, George Bush.
Saddam, of course, as we were saying earlier.
Rather like Keir Starmer wanted to be close to...
Saddam Hussein, though, the leader of Iraq, he did nothing to disillusion anybody in the West. That he had these weapons. He
so his view was... His whole sort of rationale was that he was against Iran. That's what he's fought an 8-year war on. And he wanted to show the world, and particularly Iran, that he was a strong leader.
Yeah.
So what he couldn't do was actually put his hand up and say, I don't have any nuclear weapons. I think there was all this sort of gamesmanship.
After 9/11 in Afghanistan, Saddam was immediately picked out as an enemy of the US, when in fact he wasn't responsible at all in any way for Al-Qaeda and
for
Afghanistan.
9/11,
it all got mixed up in US politics and public opinion.
That's true.
But because 2003, Britain should never have gone to war in that. And that is not to say Saddam wasn't evil and you would want him toppled. It's just whether you think you can bomb countries into
So the view, I don't want to defend Blair or Alistair Campbell, but I think the practical view was the Americans are going to do this anyway. So, and Bush was very clear, right from really 9/11, actually, that that's what they were going to do.
Well, thankfully, in the
and the question was, are you going to support them?
Yeah.
Or are you not going to support your key ally? That was the question they were facing.
In the 1960s, we had a Prime Minister in Harold Wilson who knew the Americans were going to bomb Vietnam anyway, and there was huge pressure on Britain to take part, and we didn't take part. We should not have taken part in...
But back to the here and now.
In Iraq.
Sure. What about Blair? For all of that history, is he suited to help govern?
With Trump, he's always going to keep people on their toes. He's never going to say, actually, Tony Blair's going to do a great job, let him get on with it. He's always going to be playing around with people. And
but what do you think? Do you think he could do the job?
I think he probably could do the job, but the big proviso, I think his credibility in the region, or certainly on the Arab side, I think is a big question mark.
The deputy head of the Palestinian Authority has gone on record as saying he is happy and willing to work with Tony Blair.
It's an acceptable choice to him.
I'm not aware we've heard from Mahmoud Abbas, the Prime Minister, if you like.
No, but that's a big straw in the wind, isn't it?
Yeah, sure. It is, because in the past, travelling to Israel and Palestine as a journalist and meeting on both sides, had a lot of criticism from the Palestinian Authority of Tony Blair when he was an envoy into the Middle East, and they thought he was just too close to the Israelis. But maybe after the deaths of so many, the Palestinian Authority is somewhat desperate.
And that's what we got.
And that's why they think he might be the least worst option.
A lot of viewers won't realise that Tony Blair, for good or ill, has spent a lot of his time post being a Prime Minister in the Middle East. I mean, he was head of the Quartet. He spent, many years travelling there, trying to build bridges. So he does know the issues. Yeah, and he's got contacts and he's got a network.
And he's got experience. OK, well, that is our debate this morning. Do you think Tony Blair is the right man for the job? So let us know what you think, and we'll be discussing that with Owen Jones, the journalist, and an Iraq veteran as well. Can we take our attention back to matters closer to home? Planning. And whether you are a NIMBY, not in my backyard. So the Housing Secretary, Steve Reid, is going to announce changes to its planning reform bill. It wants to get more houses built, because, of course, this Labour government said 1.5 million houses by the end of this Parliament. It looks like it's going to be short. There's not many planning applications getting through. But there are people, the whole community in Wigan, because it's not until you see what happens on the ground that you think, would I want this in my backyard? This is literally the bottom of people's gardens in a small part of Wigan. And this is 4 warehouses. These are the bare bones of them at the moment. But imagine those completely clad, 60 feet tall, blocking out. There were beautiful fields and sort of meadows behind. It wasn't green belt.
Sunshine and daylight.
But you're exactly right, blocking out the sun. Would that make you a NIMBY?
Yeah, and the issue, I mean, having been a constituency MP, the issue with that isn't just the building. It's the lorries that are coming in every day, morning and day and night, ferrying the goods to and fro, the huge warehouse.
Well, the people who live in the street that's so severely affected by this, they say that originally they agreed to it because the height of the buildings was much lower than they actually turned out to be. So it all seemed to be going through on that basis. But then that particular planning application expired, a new one was put in, but this one was for much taller buildings. They say they never saw that second application, and that their acceptance was taken for granted.
This is a frequent complaint, that planning permission is given in principle for a project. And then somebody else comes along, takes that in principle, and then gets it massively...
but they can appeal that. I mean, if the process...
But it's already built. I mean, it's
it could be knocked down.
It could be knocked down. I mean, that's what happens.
It could be.
It could be, yeah.
It's very unlikely.
How hard is that going to be?
I agree. If there's a huge warehouse and you buy a house next to it, that's one thing. If you buy a house and a huge warehouse is built next to you, that's a completely other thing. And it's where local reality hits up against a national plan.
That's right.
It says NIMBY's not in my backyard, then the government says we want YIMBY. Yes, in my backyard. Well, it depends what's in your backyard.
That's right. And also the things can change.
I just sympathise with those people in that Wigan area.
Having said all of that, there is a problem that the government faces, that our governments face. How are we going to get growth back into the economy? And one way that we've done it in the past is by building. And actually, the population has expanded. We've talked about that a lot. And we need more houses. Both the Conservatives and Labour accepted that.
But where's the balance?
Yeah.
Because everybody wants growth.
Yes.
Everybody wants jobs. These 4 60-foot warehouses, they literally represent growth and jobs.
Sure.
And yet you wouldn't want that in your own backyard.
No, but there were specifics about the planning process. I mean, the people had agreed.
The council said they went through the whole thing absolutely right and proper.
The first time they gave the planning permission, it was a different proposal.
Yeah.
Exactly, yeah.
And that's probably what they should have
Well,
stuck
we will
to.
show those pictures to Steve Reid, the Housing Minister, in about 45 minutes.
He wants planning reform loosened up so that wind farms can get through other infrastructure projects, reservoirs.
Wind farms tend not to be next to houses. I like wind farms. I do a lot of walking.
You can see them.
I do a lot of walking.
People hate them.
Yeah, but I don't mind. I think they can improve, actually, an environment. Yeah. I think when you go...
Can I ask you both a personal question?
Yeah, sure.
Were you smacked or hit as children by your parents?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah?
But everyone else was in my street, so I didn't mind. If I did an autobiography...
You get a clip on the ear.
Where did it all go right?
No. But that used to happen. You get a clip on the ear,
Yeah, well, I was hit as well. Well, as you know, there is a growing campaign in this country to have all smacking and hitting of children outlawed. Alan Shearer and Michael Caine have both signed a letter that's gone to the Prime Minister pushing for this. What do you think? Do you think it is... We've reached a bit like smoking in pubs. When it was first suggested that should be banned, there was uproar. But now nobody would even think twice about that.
I think it's banned in Wales and Scotland.
It is, yes.
So we're talking about England here.
Yeah.
Why could I... I looked after my grandkids last night. Why could I... why could a parent smack a kid, say 5 or 3, but I can't hit... and quite right, it can't hit you.
No.
So I'm legally banned from hitting an adult, but I can hit a kid.
It's assault if you hit the person next to you, but not when you hit your child.
But the actual reality of having small children and they're doing, behaving really badly, and then you just smack them on the bottom, that's something spontaneous. And what are you going to do? Criminalise that? Are you going to criminalise that?
I don't think it is spontaneous now.
I think it's learned behaviour, because it happened to you.
Yes, and I think there's a new generation of parents growing up who don't smack their kids, and it's much... I think it's much better.
Well, I deeply resented being smacked and hit. My father actually used a cane on me.
And
it never did me... I mean, people say it never did me any harm. Well, it did me harm. A, it hurt, and B, it didn't... It caused nothing but resentment.
Yeah,
and I never touched my children.
And of course, not even a smack.
The law in England at the moment is you can chastise physically, as they call it, as long as it doesn't leave a mark. So it means a pale, white-skinned kid can't be hit as hard as a kid of colour.
That's crazy. I mean...
But that is the law. That is the law.
But the spirit of the law is that you can't smack someone too hard. That's what it's trying to say. It's trying to define it in that way.
The issue that always crystallises this is you've got a 5-year-old who runs into the road and you need to tell them that is not good behaviour. And would you smack your child on the wrist for that?
But I disagree with Richard. I think a lot of the times it's spontaneous behaviour. It's not something that you've been taught. Your natural response
You'd be prosecuted for that spontaneous behaviour in Scotland, but
not in England. And I think we have a more pragmatic approach.
Look, if a 5-year... And I get it, a parent, you're terrified. A 5-year-old is about running the road. You'd probably grab the wrist and you'd probably shout. And that would give the child a shock. I think that is better than hitting them, which is what it's all about, hitting them, assaulting them.
Yeah, it does seem remarkable that within the same country it is legal in some parts of the country
that's
and illegal
devolution.
in other...
I mean, there are lots of things like that.
Devolution over something as sort of so sensitive as how you discipline your child.
That's why the Welsh and Scots and to some extent the Northern Irish get advantages as we don't here. They don't pay for NHS prescriptions, for instance, but we do in England.
Ah,
just
an unrelated issue, but you're right. It's about devolution.
But I think we can learn. England can learn learn from Scotland and Wales.
More free stuff.
Right,
More free stuff.
Yeah, or important life-saving medication.
If you want to defend beating children.
Right, you alluded to this earlier, Kwasi, when you said we talk about the fact that our population is growing.
Definitely.
Boris Johnson has finally he's broken his silence.
It's been a one-man population increase machine, is it? 8, 9, 10, 50 children.
But this is specifically, he's broken his silence on Nigel Farage's accusation that Boris Johnson is personally responsible for the Boris wave of immigration, where it almost topped 1 million net. He actually says, nothing to do with me, Gov, that it's Rishi Sunak who failed because he didn't send migrants to Rwanda. Now, I'm the first person to mention Rwanda morning, Kevin. But
650.
As far as I recall, 4 people were sent to Rwanda. They were all volunteers, and we were only ever going to process a couple of hundred in Rwanda anyway. So I'm not sure how that was going to reduce the numbers.
I mean, we do debate the points of the policy, but there was evidence that it was a deterrent.
Right.
In that people did not want to come here with the threat looming over them.
That's why it was selected.
That they were going to be deported there. That was a lot of the rationale.
Can I say, the so-called Boris wave was very little to do with people coming over in small boats.
That's true.
The vast majority... something like 19 in 20 were people coming here legally with net migration. I think also Ukraine was a factor.
That was a huge factor.
Which people at the time celebrated and cheered, and many, many, many tens of thousands of people opened their homes in the most generously spirited way possible to house
fair
families.
Of Boris to blame Rishi? I mean, it was the courts. Surely it was the courts which actually stopped it happening.
It was the courts that stopped it happening. Exactly.
The UK Supreme Court.
I mean, I remember discussing it at the time, and the view was that it did act as a deterrent, and that's been lost in a lot of the subsequent debate.
I remember when David Cameron said he'd bring immigration down to the tens of thousands. And under Boris, it was 873,000.
So this was...
Actually, so did you, because you stood on the manifesto.
We stood on the manifesto.
Yeah, I mean, not just David Cameron.
I put my hands up. You know, we had a manifesto, and all the Conservative candidates at that election, I think it was 2010, would have signed up to the same thing.
And 2015.
And 2015. I don't think it was I don't think
No, you changed the wording.
I think 15.
Was that 19 or 17?
You're right. And that was something which the government suffered for.
Do you think that it will be the lead issue in the next election?
I think Farage wants to make it the lead issue in this election, the coming election. And as long as he's, number one, or reformer number one in the polls, I think it'll be very high up there. And all the polling suggests, actually, that it's gone from being a kind of middle-of-the-pack issue
to the top
in terms of voters' concerns, right to the top. And I don't see that coming down.
Cost of living is usually the issue
Standard of public service.
Yeah, number one.
I think there's a kind of... that all adds up to... Have you got hope or despair? Who do you feel is going to be best for you, your neighbourhood, your country?
Usually, isn't it? As you go into the ballot box, do you feel better and better off than you did at the time of the last election?
But you look at what... I mean, you say these other issues, but the other parties, and I'm talking about Labour and the Conservative Party, who are behind reform, are really following reform on this issue. They're talking about it, they're moving more towards reform's position, and I'm not sure necessarily that will work for them. But so...
You don't think it will chip away at reform's lead in the polls?
Well, I think it's a difficult one, because if it's their number one issue, and you look as if you're trying to copy them, that, in a way, endorses that party, the Reform Party.
Yeah, I think you've got to confront, and you've got to say, look, multiculturalism has been great for Britain, because this has moved on from small boats and migration. It's about the type of country we are. And I think you've just got to be very, very principled.
But your position is clear.
Vibrant, diverse.
But your position is clear. But what Labour is doing at the moment is looking two ways. On the one hand, the Prime Minister says Farage is racist, but then Shabana Mahmood is coming up with policies that reform...
He said
the reform are pushing.
He said the policy of
you're right.
Kicking out largely back and brown people is racist rather than
you're right.
reform.
To be fair, you're right. But it's a double message, right? It's facing two ways.
I thought he made a very well argued and balanced speech at the Labour conference, and then a day later he's talking about removing golden tickets from refugees.
Exactly.
I'll choose my words correctly, Willy Wonka. And of course, he played straight into the narrative that if you are a refugee, you're somehow...
but that's the point I was making. That was exactly the point I'm making.
Yeah.
He's saying one thing on one side of his mouth, saying this is a racist policy, and then he's copying the so-called racist policy.
Which is where you've got to have a very principled position.
Yeah.
Well, if it goes on the way it is now, do you think he'll still be leader in 6 months?
Who?
Starmer.
Yeah.
I think the only reason why he's staying is that the Labour Party, unlike us, don't have them. I mean, we just got rid of them, you know, willy-nilly, and then the letters and Graham Brady and all of that. But they don't have that mechanism.
Did Kemi save herself with her speech at Tory party conference?
Yeah, for 6 months. I mean, let's see what
happens. So you think Kemi may not last more than 6 months?
I think all of these leaders will come to a reckoning, perhaps, at the local elections.
In May.
In May. We'll look at the results and we'll say the Tories have lost, if they have lost X amount of councillors. Labour have lost so many councillors, if that's what happens. Yeah. And then there'll be a new judgment as to whether these leaders can continue. I'm sure that's what's going to happen.
I wouldn't put money on Starmer being there at the general election. He might be. I mean, you could even say he probably will be.
Yeah.
But there is a real possibility.
But how do you get rid of him?
Which is astonishing when you look at that size of the majority. The Labour way is you have to have 20% of 80 MPs sign letters saying they want a certain West Streeton or Shabana.
Yeah, but then they've got to campaign and win.
Just the way you lot do it, you just have a big fight.
No, but
OK, we've got to stop the fight there. Ding, ding. Round 2 will be at 8:45. Thanks both very much indeed.